Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for this briefing. To get us started, I'm going to hand things off to HRC's Joni Madison.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us for this press conference. My name is Joni Madison. I use pronouns she, hers, and I'm the HRC interim president. You've probably guessed already that the image you're seeing as I speak is not my face. It's the face of a Florida student who is worried about being silenced by Florida's new Don't Say Gay or Trans legislation. Each of our speakers today has agreed to put up a photo submitted by a student instead of appearing on camera, so that we can call attention to the very real fears that this law has sparked in the classrooms and hallways of Florida schools. Let me be clear. Every student deserves to be seen. Every student deserves an education that prepares them for health and success. And every student deserves leaders who will stand with them, not bully or attack them. By signing the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill, Ron DeSantis is doing just that. This dangerous new law will mean the government can effectively force LGBTQ plus students, their families, and educators to go into the closet, to hide in the shadows, even when they are at school trying to learn. Young people with LGBTQ plus family members could be forced to remain silent about their families while others can speak freely. And LGBTQ plus school staff may be forbidden from so much as mentioning their loved ones. Kids have one job when they go to school, that's to learn. Instead, LGBTQ plus kids, the kids who might feel different, but they don't know the words yet, will spend their days forced to hide key parts of themselves and their families. They'll be forced to hide or risk breaking the law. We're calling on Ron DeSantis and the state of Florida to repeal the dangerous and backward Don't Say Gay or Trans law and let kids learn. Of course, this attempt to erase LGBTQ plus families from schools won't work. There will be lawsuits and defiance from those who refuse to comply with such an impossible and discriminatory policy. We know that so long as this policy is in effect, it's going to harm the mental health and well-being of school children. Studies have shown repeatedly that LGBTQ plus kids in accepting, affirming environments have similar mental health outcomes to the rest of the population. But when they are subject to lies, hate, and discrimination, the statistics for depression, drug abuse, and suicidal thoughts skyrocket. To LGBTQ plus kids in Florida, I know this is scary and I know this is hard. I know because I've been where you are. 40 years ago, I was a young queer kid in the South. Coming out to my high school English teacher changed all that, and it changed my life. Even though I was so scared to come out to my teacher told me, Joni, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. You are perfect just the way you are. So it really breaks my heart that lawmakers in Florida and elsewhere are trying to take this support away. But they can't change the truth, which is that so many of your teachers, coaches, and peers support and affirm you. There is no time to waste. A chilling message has been sent to every LGBTQ plus kid in Florida, and the damage has already been done. We call on Ron DeSantis to prevent further harm to Florida's most vulnerable children. We join with our partners here today and the families of children served by Governor DeSantis and the state of Florida, and we demand a full repeal of the law. But it's not just Florida. HRC is tracking more than 583 new laws being introduced in state legislation, of which 310 are anti-LGBTQ plus pieces of legislation around this country. That's over half. And more than 135 of those are specifically anti-transgender bills. This week alone, governors in South Dakota, Arizona, and Oklahoma all signed bills into law that would censor school curricula, ban some type of medical care for transgender youth, and prevent transgender kids from playing on sports teams consistent with their gender identity. Similar bills are awaiting their governor's signature in Kentucky and South Dakota, and the Discriminatory Stop Woke Act remains on Governor DeSantis' desk in Florida. The other speakers joining me here today can go into even greater detail about the harms that the students and educators face from the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill. I hope you'll all agree by the end of this briefing that as long as this policy is in effect, It is a stain on the state of Florida and on ongoing unwarranted attack on vulnerable people who did nothing to deserve it. And I'll hand it back to Delphine.
Thank you, Joni. Our next speaker is Nadine Smith from Equality Florida. Nadine?
Hi, I'm Nadine Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Equality Florida, and I am a parent. My son has done what elementary school students have done for decades. He's gone to school and drawn pictures of his parents, our dogs, and himself. And under this Don't Say Gay bill, teachers are being told that his picture of his family has to be erased or handled gingerly as though his family is something sinister. Many students now enrolled in Florida schools were born after Abortifeld, the 2015 Supreme Court decision that made marriage equality the law of the land nationwide. And they've grown up taking acceptance of LGBTQ people for granted as their fellow classmates, their family, their friends. As a result of this law, students in Florida may now for the first time be made to feel shame and stigma about their families or their own identities. And we should be clear that we're already seeing the harmful effects on the ground in Florida, even before Governor DeSantis signed this bill into law. The rhetoric from the legislature, the extreme rhetoric coming from the governor's office itself, where he describes opponents of this bill as groomers, AKA pedophiles. We've heard this before. We saw it in Florida during the Johns Committee in the 50s, the McCarthy-esque committee put together by the legislature to find and purge gay people on university campuses and civil rights activists on university campuses. We saw it again with Anita Bryant and her so-called Save Our Children campaign that did no such thing. In the wake of that campaign, rooted in the same premise that there's something inherently sinister about the existence of LGBT people, that we have to be hidden from children. And in the wake of that, Florida became the only state with a 28-year ban on the ability to adopt, a ban that denied children permanent homes. And now we see this hateful logic taken to its inevitable and twisted conclusion in Texas, where parents of trans kids, there's a bounty on them, and the idea that you will criminalize and then take away the children of our families is not hyperbolic. We're seeing it unfold, and we've seen it in our own state. We are also seeing the effects of this, not just because of the text of the bill, but because of the context of the hateful rhetoric, especially amplified by the governor's office as he seeks to position himself for a presidential run. We see it where teachers are being told to remove posters that show support for LGBTQ students. We see it in school districts, where the same people pushing this legislation have been systematically challenging any books that deal with racism or include LGBTQ characters and labeling those books pornographic. And just to give you an idea of how extreme they are, they've actually labeled the book And Tango Makes Three, the true story of two male penguins raising a penguin chick at a New York zoo. They've labeled that pornographic. So even though people say this is about K-3, as though my son and other families don't exist with our kids in school who ought to be able to talk about their families without hesitation and should expect their teacher to intervene if they're being bullied, or even if a student has a question. You have two moms? Yeah. And a teacher ought to be in the position to affirm that all families matter, ought to be included and respected. But this law also goes further, and beyond K-3, it says that anything that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate, K-12, if you label everything that includes LGBTQ content, LGBTQ families, any reflection of our community that is positive, as pornography, you see very quickly the slippery slope to eliminating any positive mention. So with that, I will turn it back to our MC for today. As you know, Equality Florida has taken this fight to court. We're prepared to battle it in the legislature, and we will never turn our backs on the students and the parents who are standing with us in this lawsuit. And I do want to just end with a shout out to all of the students across Florida who organized themselves to walk out of class, to hold protests. Some of them marched to the Capitol and formed a gauntlet and made the legislators walk between them on their way to cast their vote. I want to just say to those leaders, those students who will bear the brunt of this bill, your leadership is going to make all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Next, I'm going to pass it to Princess Moss of the National Education Association.
Thank you so much, Delphine, and good morning, everyone. My name is Princess Moss, and I am Vice President of the 3 million member National Education Association. We are the nation's largest labor union, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. You know, our members work every level of education, and they stand upon one core belief. And that core belief is that every public school student, Black, white, brown, and Indigenous, AAPI, LGBTQ+, and differently abled, every student should receive the preparation they need to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. And that includes Izzy, whose image I am displaying today, and whose voice supporters of the Don't Say Gay or Trans law want to silence. In Florida and all across our nation, educators help students fuse together their skills, abilities, interests, and experiences. They become the tools with which our students stand in their authenticity, build their dreams, and set out toward the future confident that those dreams will be achieved. But thanks to the Don't Say Gay or Trans law, educators may have to abandon their own authenticity by being forced to conceal their sexual orientation or gender identity. The law may also prohibit educators from mentioning a same-sex partner. In addition, the legislation's call for educators to only mention what is age appropriate to students, 3rd grade and above, that's murky at best. The law leaves educators to determine for themselves what they are able to say. A wrong guess could result in a lawsuit. Our LGBTQ+ educators are role models for our LGBTQ+ students. Every educator who wants to come out should be able to do that. Every educator who wants to talk about sexual orientation or gender identity should be able to do that. Rather than putting into place harmful laws that create fear and promote dishonesty, Florida should be focused on creating public schools that are places of safety, hope, and promise, so that every student, and every educator will feel safe, welcome, encouraged, and supported. Thank you. I'll give it back to you, Delphine.
Thank you very much, Princess. I'm next going to pass it on to Rodrigo Hang-Leitonen, who's with the National Center for Transgender Equality.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Rodrigo Hang-Leitonen. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for Transgender Equality. I was born and raised in Florida. I am a proud Miamian. If you could see my office, you'd see a sign that says 90 miles from Cuba right over my shoulder, which for you all from South Florida would recognize. But today, transgender people like me have to be fearful in Florida. And unfortunately, not only in Florida. So far this year, more than 135 anti-transgender bills have been introduced around the country. The reason is that anti-LGBTQ ideologues have shopped these copycat bills around the nation, taking advantage of the fact that most Americans still don't realize they know a transgender person. It can be hard to understand what it means to be a transgender. It's understandable to have questions. No matter how familiar or unfamiliar you are with transgender people in your life, we can all agree that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Every student deserves to feel safe, to feel protected, and to feel like they belong. Unfortunately, this don't say gay or trans bill does just the opposite. Here at the National Center for Transgender Equality, we conduct the largest and most comprehensive study of transgender people's experiences. It's called the US Transgender Survey. Here are the findings from that study about transgender Floridians' experiences in schools. To be clear, this is not trans people nationally. These statistics are regarding transgender people in Florida specifically. 75% of those who were out or perceived as transgender at some point between kindergarten and 12th grade experienced mistreatment. Again, that's 75%. 50% of them were verbally harassed. 23% were physically attacked. 15% were sexually assaulted in K through 12 school because of being transgender. And 19% faced such severe mistreatment as a transgender student that they left a K through 12 school. Again, that's 19% were pushed out of a school simply for being who they are. The Florida I believe in is a place of opportunity and freedom, where students who study and work hard have the chance to succeed. This law runs against those values. And the current wave of anti-LGBTQ bills around the country isn't an attack on LGBTQ people alone. It's an attack on all of our freedoms and democratic ideals as a nation. We all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who we are. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Delphine.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Our next speaker is Jennifer Solomon. She's a Florida mom and a member of HRC's Parents for Transgender Equality Council.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Jennifer, and I use she and her pronouns, and I have the incredible honor of being Cooper's mom. Right now, I'm speaking as a parent of an LGBTQ plus child in Florida, and I'm terrified. I feel my family is being targeted and that my child is being used as a political pawn. We are just a regular family raising a terrific, fabulous child, and he deserves respect and not to be harmed for living as his authentic self. What really keeps me up at night is his safety. The powerful forces in Tallahassee are targeting him and creating an environment that allows hate and discrimination in our schools. Cooper's in 5th grade, and he has not only survived his elementary school years, he has thrived. And that's because of the guidance and protection that the trusted educators in his life were able to provide. Imagine being a preteen and trying to navigate adolescence and now learning that it's illegal to talk about who you are. That is going to be my child's reality next year as he enters middle school. My real fear isn't only for Cooper, but for the thousands of kids who don't have a trusted adult to talk to. Teachers are that source for so many, and with this new law, they could be fired or sued for that, and that just breaks my heart. The thing is, this doesn't just affect LGBTQ plus youth, but it affects all kids, because banning books and silencing voices is not how we prepare kids for the future. I don't know about you, but I want to live in a world where this generation is the majority so that acceptance of all is the norm. Each year, the Florida legislature and those across the country are passing more and more bills that attack LGBTQ youth. They're creating a solution to something that's just not a problem. Look, I see the pain and confusion on Cooper's face when he asks me, why are the adults that are supposed to be representing us being bullies? And I truly can't answer that. If I could talk to the legislators who passed the Don't Say Gay bill, I'd ask this one thing. Is the comfort of a select few parents worth the detrimental impact this will have on an already vulnerable population? My child and all children deserve to be celebrated and not targeted. He needs to be seen as equal to other children, and he has the right to be heard. As a parent, I will never stop advocating for a society where all children can feel safe so that they can learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Our final speaker today is Florida teacher Corey Bernard. And Corey actually couldn't be here because he's in school teaching right now. So I am going to share my screen and play a video that Corey recorded just last night.
Hello, everyone. My name is Corey Bernard, and I am a kindergarten teacher here in Bradenton, Florida at the wonderful Barbara A. Harvey Elementary School. And I'm just going to speak about how we as teachers and I as an educator in Florida today with the passage of the Don't Say Gay bill are being affected personally and professionally. One of the biggest things professionally is that, you know, our school motto is literally family, memory, and passion. That is what we live by here at Harvey Elementary School. It's what we do every day. It's what we focus on. And part of doing that is sharing our family and sharing our experiences at home, sharing our love for our passions and our hobbies. And sometimes those hobbies include our spouses and include our significant others. And in my case, that includes my partner. And one of the biggest things that I'm struggling with right now is how am I going to respond to when my students ask me about, Mr. Bernard, what did you do over the weekend? Mr. Bernard, who is that boy in the picture next to you right outside your classroom and you guys are both at Disney World? Because they're kindergarten and we foster discussion and we foster asking questions. And so I am so worried as to how I'm going to respond to those now that we have this legislation in place, because there can be a very fine line between what a parent might consider discussion, what a parent might consider instruction and teaching. And so that is a huge concern for me. It's a huge concern for my students too. Like I said in my interview with MSNBC, I have a little girl with 2 moms this year, and the kids are curious. Example, I overheard some of my kids talking the other day, just as we were packing up. One of the little boys just said to another little boy, did you know that Cadence has 2 moms? And so, you know, these conversations are happening, whether, you know, we want them to or not, and it's okay for them to happen, but they're also going to come to me about it. And that happens. They do come to me and they want to know, well, why does Cadence have 2 moms? Am I going to be able to answer that? And I should be able to answer that. But this law is so unclear as to what could happen to me if I am having those discussions with my kids. And personally, I am very personally affected by the words that are being used with this bill, injecting and indoctrinating, because when you start using those words with LGBTQ plus people, it sends a clear message to how they really feel about us as human beings. And just because we love differently, I feel that my love is less, or is a less love than what their love may be, because they use those words. So like I've said before, I'm worried for myself, I'm worried for my colleagues, I'm worried for my students, and it is a really scary time to be teaching. And I will say that ever since coming out with, you know, with the interview, it has been pretty amazing to see the support that my school community is rallying around me, but it's also been very disheartening to see the hate and the cruelty that is coming out from the community, really the whole country. However, I know that doing things like what we're doing right now in this press conference, we're moving forward, we're getting the word out there that us as teachers, we do feel this bill. It's not just something that's on paper. It's not just something that they think is helping to protect parents. It is affecting us in the classroom every day. It's affecting the mental health of educators like myself. It's affecting parents who are part of the LGBTQ plus community who have children inside the schools.
So that means at this point, we can move on to our Q&A portion with the media. So thank you so much to all of our speakers. And at this point, we're going to be joined by Cathryn Oakley, who is HRC's State Legislative Director and Senior Counsel. We want to ask that reporters put their name and outlet into the chat so that we can call on each of you in turn. So if anybody wants to ask questions at this time, go ahead and jump into the chat. And Serena, since you're first, why don't you go ahead?
Great, thank you all for doing this. Yesterday, the administration, President Biden, in his address, said that the administration is standing up for you against all these hateful bills. I'm just wondering what outreach you've heard from the administration, if there has been any connection with the Justice Department, and if you feel that the administration is standing up against these bills in an appropriate and meaningful way.
This is Kate Oakley at HRC. I'm the state legislative director, as Delphine said, and I'll just start by that, and others certainly may want to add more. One of the things that I would add is that yesterday, among the many things that came from the administration as part of Trans Day of Visibility, the Department of Justice, this happens separately from the things that were happening from the White House, so it was not quite as noticeable, I think, yesterday with all of the many things, happily, that the administration did yesterday. But the Department of Justice sent a letter to state attorneys general, reminding them that transgender students, in fact, do have rights under both federal civil rights law and the United States Constitution. You know, a letter in and of itself is, of course, only just one small piece of the puzzle, but I think it's important to say that while the president has been an incredibly, has been a vocal supporter of transgender rights and has on multiple occasions stated his support for transgender youth. He also the administration has weighed in on several of the cases pending in states around the country regarding some of the discriminatory laws that have passed over the last few years related to trans youth, including trans youth playing sports. And, you know, I think yesterday's letter is a helpful piece of information regarding what, you know, where the administration is intending to go. So definitely would direct folks to that, and we can share that link out if people need.
This is Rodrigo Hanglaytonen with the National Center for Transgender Equality. I can add to that and welcome any of my other colleagues here today to do so as well. Kate alluded to some of this, but one of the actions the Biden-Harris administration took yesterday that I would highlight is that they had an in-person event hosting transgender young people and their parents who are facing the real life damage of laws like this, or in some states, bills that are still going through their legislative process. These were families from around the country, everywhere from Alabama to Illinois, who were, even though they were from all different parts of the nation, they were experiencing the same kinds of barriers. They were all experiencing the kind of stigmatization that we've all talked about here today as something that Florida families are going through. So I think it really shows the human stakes of this. At NCTE, we've been working very closely with the Biden administration to determine what other actions they can take what things they can do from the bully pulpit, frankly, to demonstrate leadership and that symbolic value of reaching out to trans youth, as well as the practical things of intervening. We're working with the Department of Education to see if there's what else they can do, especially through the lens of Title IX protections, to help LGBTQ youth in Florida. But really, I would just lift up that the Biden administration is doing so much. And I think it shows that seeing that so many families from around the country experiencing the same kinds of things shows the humanity behind these policies and shows what's really on the line when these extremist state legislatures try to take advantage like this.
I also just want to point out, I put it in the chat, but Secretary of Education Miguel Cardano met with LGBTQ students and parents in Orlando yesterday. And, you know, he did something that despite multiple requests, Governor DeSantis refused to do. He sat with the actual families and came to understand even more deeply what this means in Florida. And we've heard from teachers who on the day of the signing, you know, a student in her class got a text message alerting him that the governor had signed this. And she said, you know, my students just burst out in tears. And so I think that we have to pay attention and call on our allies at the federal level to stand firmly, not just against what is happening because of the specific language, but what is happening because there are some places where, unfortunately, while overwhelmingly people who work in the school system actually care about the kids and want a safe environment, there are some bad actors who are emboldened to do things that go well beyond the scope, but reflect the hostility. So we've heard of schools where where a principal told a trans student they weren't permitted to talk about being trans, even privately to friends while on campus. Now, these are the kinds of things that have prompted us to put together a hotline that we're going to be rolling out, because we're getting calls from parents, from teachers, from administrators, because of how vague this thing is. They're struggling to figure out how to navigate it. And beyond that, beyond the language of this bill, there are things that are now being said or done. And I posted a Twitter post saying the new Florida Board of Education appointee praised a parent for reporting a teacher's Protect Trans Kids shirt that was worn on Trans Day of Visibility. So these are the kinds of things that are emanating from the hostile rhetoric that surrounded passage of this bill. And these are the places where the Justice Department and the Department of Education are going to be critical allies in pushing back.
Thank you all for weighing in on that. Any further questions from our media friends? Kate, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, we're hearing from some teachers who are, paying up on their union dues, in advance of anticipating getting a potential complaint because of this law. Are you all developing legal guidance or legal support that you can offer educators on how to navigate this?
This is Kate Oakley from HRC. I'm happy to start with that, and I don't know if others have more that they want to add here. But I think one of the major challenges around this bill is how incredibly vague it is, and I think there are so many outstanding questions about how it would be applied, and frankly, what complying with this law looks like. It very much seems to me that a teacher could have a really different experience year over year, depending on what the composition of their classroom, and particularly the composition of the parents in their classroom looks like. I suspect that a parent like Nadine, for example, is going to have a completely different set of ideas about what's appropriate than a parent like, for example, Ron DeSantis, if they both had kids in the same classroom, right? So, a teacher is going to have to be playing to the parents who are most likely to litigate, whose sense of what's appropriate is the most limited. That is the only way that the school will save itself from being subject to a lawsuit. And I think that what exactly the parameters of that are so incredibly vague under this bill. Even, I think the question of what's appropriate for a conversation in 11th grade is going to be really different from what's an appropriate conversation in 4th grade. And then of course, from kindergarten to 3rd grade, it's obviously even a different standard. And how teachers are supposed to navigate this, frankly, it could not be more confusing. I think the idea of trying to give people parameters about how to comply is a really terrifying prospect. And for folks who are directly involved in providing that legal advice, I think it's incredibly challenging to give teachers any guidance whatsoever about what they can talk about and not talk about. It is just simply not clear. This is a law that is going to be impossible to comply with.
So Kate, I mentioned that we're setting up a hotline just to handle the volume of calls that we're getting, and a defense fund that is separate from the lawsuit, because what we're dealing with are not just things that are flowing specifically from this law, but from a sense that, there's nothing in this that required the taking down of stickers on Florida virtual classrooms, but we're seeing things happen that we want to provide support for school districts, administrators, teachers, and parents and students. And, there are tons of questions. One teacher said, what happens if I'm pregnant and a student asks, are you having a boy or a girl? Am I supposed to say, I can't answer that deals with gender identity, and you should go ask your parents. So, Kate is correct that it is so vaguely written, so broadly written, that how it's going to be enforced, what we get from the legislative, the language that, and the rhetoric from the governor's office, the clear anti-LGBT hostility is there, but the plain reading of the bill, I think, is where while the challenge to the actual language is there, I think the place we're going to see a whole lot more activity is around a general sense that anything that shows LGBTQ people in a positive light anywhere on campus are going to be subject to things that violate the rights of students. I think we're going to see a whole lot of that happening, and we already are.
Hi, this is Princess from the National Education Association, and I would echo what my colleagues have already said, in that the bill is very murky. And the main thing for the NEA, a primary piece for the NEA, is that we believe that all educators and all students deserve a safe working and learning environment. And of course, a student's learning environment is an educator's working environment. So we already have a system in place where, first of all, if our members feel like they are impacted in any way at the local level, they can reach out to their association or their union representative for assistance. That is one of the benefits of membership of the National Education Association. The other piece is that we will continue to organize around the issues that have been surfaced with this bill. We will continue to organize to support our LGBTQ plus community. Some of the other things that we are doing in regards to the legal being there as the legal support for our members is that we continue to speak out at our at our National Education Association board meetings. And I know speaking out at a board meeting, that sounds kind of like, well, yeah, but okay, but it's important to know that our board consists of almost 200 members from around the country, and including Great Britain. So we, when we come together, we coalesce and we talk about how to organize around the issues, the issues like we are talking about today. We will continue to oppose harmful legislation. We will continue to ask our 3 million members to write legislators and to show their advocacy for a safe and healthy environment for all students and educators. And so those are just some of the things that the National Education Association is doing in addition to being that source for our members. And thank you for the question.
And it looks like we have a question from Danielle Brown from Florida Phoenix.
Hi, thank you. So we're seeing some of the responses to the lawsuit filed against HB 1557, particularly from Governor DeSantis, who was saying that that the law is not restricting free speech, rather classroom instruction. And I was curious, what is the response to that interpretation of the law?
Well, this is Nadine Smith. I'll just say that just yesterday, another bill championed by Governor DeSantis was substantially struck down by a judge, basically for the same reason, for being vague and overbroad. And I think it's pretty clear when you see the opposition for this, the overwhelming opposition coming from those that are closest to students, who work with students most regularly. From the Florida Association of School Nurses, school counselors, the Florida Association of School Social Workers, the PTA, the Teachers Union, even among Republicans, the 9 Republicans that took the rare step of breaking ranks to vote against this included the head of one of the largest child welfare agencies. So the folks who are working with students day in and day out, who have the closest proximity to the classroom, are the ones saying, this is a vaguely written law that has already had a chilling effect and will continue to cause harm to students. Put their voices above a governor whose sole purpose in bringing this forward is his presidential aspirations. He's playing to a national audience of donors. He does not put the focus on what's happening in the classroom, or even really what's happening in Florida at this point.
Yeah, and this is Kate from HRC, and I'll add on to that. And I think Nadine said it perfectly. I mean, just because Ron DeSantis says it doesn't make it true. And his legislative analysis doesn't appear to be all that consistent with the legislative analysis of the judicial branch. And so, he can say all he wants that this doesn't have First Amendment implications. But, as Nadine elevated, this is not, because this bill is so vague and because it is so overbroad, the chilling effect is an incredibly important aspect of this. Because if the bill was meant to be only about curriculum, that's not actually what it says. And it's certainly already not even what the impact is. If what we're talking about is that teachers are being reported for having stickers, for having t-shirts, it's not just about what the law was quote unquote intended to do, which is, by the way, its own conversation. Because if you look at the legislative history around this bill is absolutely intended to marginalize LGBTQ youth, to take conversation about LGBTQ youth out of the classroom. There were limiting amendments that were introduced and then rejected. So it is it is clear that the overbroad and extremely vague language here was an intentional choice made by the proponents of this bill. And therefore they have to own the consequences, and the consequences include clearly major implications for teachers who do have free speech rights even within the classroom. So I think that's incredibly important to say. And I for one, do not take Governor DeSantis at his word in terms of how the courts are going to interpret pieces of legislation. He is absolutely incorrect on this one.
And if I might add, this is Princess again from the National Education Association. One of the very frustrating pieces is here is, again, another example of politicians and others trying to make decisions for public education and educators and our students who have no idea what's going on in the classroom. They have a political agenda and it is wrong. It is wrong. And so, the fact that we're having to deal with this, DeSantis is trying to further his own political agenda at the expense of human beings who deserve the right to be loved, respected, and to have a safe environment in which to work and learn. And so I am just so honored to be here today to stand up with my siblings in order to speak out against this. Thank you.
If I may, this is Nadine. I just want to make sure you see this data point in the chat that I just posted. And part of why it's so important is because we have a Safe and Healthy Schools program that we launched after the massacre at Pulse. And from the time we launched it, we've trained over 35,000 school district employees, from principals and classroom teachers to bus drivers and cafeteria workers. And we saw an immediate decline in all of the negative numbers associated with risk factors for students, for LGBTQ students. That positive trend began to reverse, and we saw it as the trans sports ban for elementary school students was introduced last year, and these bills are being debated now. And the correlation between the dehumanizing rhetoric around these bills has a very immediate impact on how safe young people feel. And so we can talk about it anecdotally, but the data bears it out.
And if I could, this is Jennifer Solomon. I am not only the parent of a 5th grader, but I'm also the parent of a 28-year-old daughter who identifies as lesbian and was a Miami-Dade County Public School teacher until recently. She resigned, and it was for many reasons, but this bill absolutely was the tipping point for her. She had students for years that felt close to her to confide in her, maybe feelings they had if they were struggling with maybe their sexual identity. She's an elementary school teacher, and she was that safe person. And this law was enough for her to say, I can no longer do my job. I'm fearful that I will be, I could be fired if kids found out that I'm married to a woman. And so this was personal for me, not only for a parent as a child in the school system, but a parent of a teacher. So this has an effect way beyond, and it's going to affect so many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. The floor is open if there's any other questions.
Delphine, perhaps while people are putting together questions, I would just like to reiterate a couple other points. And first of all, this is an incredibly, I think, impactful conversation, and I really appreciate everybody for being here and for being part of it. And I want to lift up something that both Nadine and Princess alluded to, which is that, This is an attack on transgender youth. It is an attack on teachers. And I think it's important to name both of those things very explicitly. Joni mentioned in her remarks that we are seeing this incredible influx of anti-transgender legislation across the country, including more than 130 bills filed across the country that explicitly target or specifically target transgender folks. And we're seeing, I think, in Florida, the confluence of this national and politically motivated attack against transgender youth that, as I say, is evidenced by the 130 bills that have been filed in 2022 across the country, which is on track to be a record-breaking amount of legislation. Last year, we had 150 specifically anti-trans bills filed across the country, and it's only just today, the first day of April. So we're on track to, I think, unfortunately exceed that amount. And what we've seen in legislatures around the country, particularly driven by folks like Governor DeSantis, who are, as Nadine said, appealing to this very specific group of folks who they're hoping will help them with national ambition. So just really this sort of super, super far right element of the Republican primary voter. And that folks like Greg Abbott in Texas and folks like Ron DeSantis and Kristi Noem, these are people who are very, very clearly, very explicitly putting the well-being of LGBTQ youth, but specifically transgender youth, in the center of their campaigns, understanding how much harm will be visited upon these kids because they're having their rights taken away, because they're being put in the national spotlight in this way, and not caring about the consequences as long as it serves their political ambitions. And in Florida, I think what we're seeing is the collision of that movement with also this movement about that relates to critical race theory, relates to the banning of books, relates to this idea that teachers are part of the problem in the sense that the kids are learning challenging concepts in schools, and that by educating children and sharing with them the truth of what the world looks like, that's in some way hurting the fabric of American society instead of in fact strengthening it. And that movement is colliding in Florida with this movement to really harm trans youth and to use trans youth as political pawns in service of national political ambitions. Both of those movements are extremely misguided. Both of them are extremely inappropriate, and they are colliding in Florida to create this Don't Say Gay or Trans bill. And I think it's important to name both of those different movements and to talk about how, frankly, neither of them is in service of the well-being of America's youth. And in fact, how deeply, deeply, deeply harmful that is. And I know that, thank you for Nadine for sharing some of those statistics in the chat and in your remarks, because this is not a victimless crime. This truly will hurt kids, truly, truly, truly will hurt kids. And the idea that this is something that legislators they're mean-spirited, they're craven, they're cowardly. They are either recklessly hurting these kids or intentionally hurting these kids. And they're doing so in service of a political goal that even only impacts or even only is welcomed by a very small section of the American electorate. It's deeply unfortunate, and it is truly alarming and frightening and despicable.
I just want to echo that. Thank you for sharing that so articulately. Yeah, this is about politics, and I just want to remind folks that the bills that we're seeing come forward are appealing to a very specific segment of folks, and that's the far right Republican primary voters. And I need to I want to remind everyone that we have the 2022 elections and the 24 presidential. what's going on is very intentional. It is very intentional, and it is very sad because our students are falling victim to folks who are self-serving, politicians who are self-serving, and educators are, being victimized as well because they're not being allowed to tell the truth. And every student deserves to be in an environment where the truth can be shared. Thank you.
This is Nadine Smith with Equality Florida. I just wanted to point out, I posted the link to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Somebody had requested it earlier. I also posted an explainer video that we've used that uses the language of the sponsors themselves. And to be clear, the sponsors of this bill now law include Dennis Baxley, who has a long anti-LGBT history. He equated being gay to being a drug abuser and drug addicted. He said he would never support anything that affirmed the existence of gay families, and he has kept that promise in this law. The other thing I just want to point out, again, this is a concerted effort where they are attacking school districts, individual school board members. They have gone district after district identifying books that they consider pornographic. I mentioned Entango and Entango makes three, the male penguins raising a nestling. But when you look at how insidious the language they use to describe children's books, simply because they have two dads or two moms, you see how extreme they are, where they describe a picture from My Two Dads where the child is sitting on the dad's lap, as I hope any parent. I really fear that these are parents who've never hugged their kids, but you see how they immediately turn this into an ugly trope. That is why we take the slippery slope of passing this legislation, having the governor's spokesperson call opponents groomers and pedophiles, and the language of those pushing this bill, school district by school district. This is a very dangerous moment, and it can't be taken lightly. And the harm that it is inflicting on young people, the harm has arrived. It is being inflicted right now, and it is a very dangerous moment for our community. And I think it's really important that at the end of the day, past the politics of it, we understand that we have a duty to stand between the intention of this and the safety of our kids.
We are coming up right at an hour. We could possibly take one more really quick question if I see Nicole, I see that you're unmuted. Did you have a question? If not, I think we can just bring things to a close here. And thanks so much to all of our speakers for sharing such emotional and informative perspectives. And to our media friends who attended, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me directly and I can respond or direct your question to somebody who can. So thank you all for being here.